The other two primordial Dharmakayas. Mu Chen's voice echoed through the grand hall, and the faces of the heavenly supremes grew complex. Even in such a critical moment, this condition was enough to make one's heart race with fear. In the current Great Thousand Worlds, there were only 5 primordial Dharmakayas, each one exceedingly rare and powerful. This was also the reason why, after Mu Chen had taken the eternal undying body from the Moat ancient clan, Imoku, the leader of the Mo clan, had gone to extreme lengths, even risking war. Now, aside from the eternal undying body, Mu Chen sought to acquire 2 more supreme Dharmakayas, which inevitably left everyone stunned. The Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor exchanged a glance, pausing for a moment, before turning their gaze to the leaders or grand elders of the other 4 ancient clans, aside from Imoku. After all, the other 4 primordial Dharmakayas were stored within these 4 ancient clans. Faced with the gaze of the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor, aside from Qing Yinjing, the leaders of the other 3 clans looked slightly uneasy. After all, the primordial Dharmakayas were of such immense importance that even they could not speak lightly on the matter. An awkward silence spread through the hall. The Futu ancient clan is willing to offer our boundless radiance body, Qing Yinjing, the grand elder of the Futu ancient clan, spoke first. Though she was the grand elder, any decision concerning the boundless radiance body required the unanimous consent of the Elder Council. However, at this moment, with the survival of the Great Thousand Worlds at stake, if they could not resist the heavenly evil god 5 years from now, the Futu ancient clan would be destroyed. What use would a primordial Dharmakaya be then? Of course, more importantly, Mu Chen was her son, and naturally, she would support him no matter what. Upon hearing Qing Yinjing's words, the leaders of the other 3 clans smiled bitterly. After all, Mu Chen was both her son and the current clan leader of the Futu ancient clan, so her support was entirely justified. The Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor nodded slightly. With the second primordial Dharmakaya secured, there was just one more to go. Timing Ancestor, the Black Heaven clan leader, and the Desolate Chiu clan leader all wore worried expressions, but none of them spoke first, clearly waiting for someone else to make the next move. As the tension lingered, Luo Li's eyes flickered, and with a gentle smile, she turned her clear gaze toward Timing Ancestor. Timing Ancestor. Hearing Luo Li's voice, Timing Ancestor's body shuddered, and he awkwardly smiled at her. Luo Li paid him no mind, but softly said, "As the holy maiden of the Tiling ancient clan, shouldn't I have a say in this matter?" Timing Ancestor nodded, offering a wry smile. The position of holy maiden is as important as the clan leader, so of course, you hold significant influence. The Tiling sacred body is the greatest treasure of my Tiling ancient clan. It's understandable that the elders might hesitate. But, Ancestor, I'd like to ask, what use is the Tiling sacred body if the Tiling ancient clan no longer exists? Luo Li's voice was gentle, but the meaning behind her words made Timing Ancestor's face tighten. If no third ranker emerged 5 years from now, the Great Thousand Worlds would perish, and the Tiling ancient clan would surely be at the forefront of that destruction. Timing Ancestor fell silent for a while, before finally sighing in resignation. You're right, Holy Maiden. At this point, if we still cling to our treasures, we're only waiting for our clan's extinction. He raised his head and looked at the Flame Emperor, Martial Ancestor, and Mu Chen. In a deep voice, he said, "In that case, the Tiling ancient clan will offer the Tiling sacred body to Mu Chen, my young friend." "Thank you, Timing Ancestor," Mu Chen said, his expression solemn as he cupped his hands. The Black Heaven clan leader and Desolate Chiu clan leader, seeing that Timing Ancestor was willing to hand over the Tiling sacred body, felt a bit more awkward. After all, Mu Chen's actions were not just for himself but for the countless beings of the Great Thousand Worlds. "If you still need it, our 2 clans can also contribute a primordial Dharmakaya," they both said, though their words sounded a little like afterthoughts. Still, Mu Chen smiled at them, expressing his gratitude. Having 3 primordial Dharmakayas gathered in one person is unprecedented. Don't disappoint everyone, Imoku, seeing the scene unfold, couldn't help but speak up, his words dripping with jealousy. Mu Chen smiled faintly. "I will do my utmost because I am fully aware of the consequences of failure." Imoku muttered a few words, his jealousy evident, but he knew when to hold his tongue. At this moment, Mu Chen had undoubtedly become the last hope for the Great Thousand Worlds. From a larger perspective, he naturally hoped for Mu Chen's success. Now that the issue of the 2 primordial Dharmakayas is settled, the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor nodded, It's time to consider how we can help you break through to Saint grade within the next 5 years. Inside the Grand Hall, all the Heavenly Supremes frowned slightly. At this moment, Chen was at the mid-immortal grade. Generally speaking, even for someone with extraordinary talent, it would not be an easy task to break through from the mid-immortal grade to the Saint grade within 5 years. It would require tremendous luck. As the others pondered, the aged face of the Undying Lord lifted, his gaze fixed on Chen. His voice, raspy, spoke, 5 years. For someone with the talent of King, if there is external help, it's not impossible. The eyes of all the Heavenly Supremes turned towards him. External help, you say? The Undying Lord's expression was filled with a hint of nostalgia. He raised his finger, pointing toward the northern wilderness hill outside, and said with a faint smile, in the ancient era, the immortal emperor fought the heavenly evil god to the death, ultimately sealing the heavenly evil god at the cost of his own life. But the immortal emperor cultivated the undying body, a body that remained immortal. Even though his life force was exhausted, his physical form endured. Moreover, the spiritual energy he cultivated throughout his life is also contained within this undying body. This energy is vast and endless, and we refer to it as the Emperor's legacy. As soon as the Undying Lord finished speaking, the Grand Hall was immediately filled with murmurs. The eyes of the Heavenly Supremes gleamed with avid interest. This was the life energy of the immortal Emperor, and though it had been somewhat depleted over time, it was still an immensely powerful force. If they could absorb and refine it, they might truly be able to elevate themselves to the Saint grade. However, the Undying Lord continued, his next words extinguishing the hopes of many. The energy within the Emperor's body contains the essence of immortality. No one can absorb even a bit of it. If one tries to forcefully take it, they will be backlashed. The Undying Lord turned to Chen with a gentle smile and added, thus, only someone who has cultivated the undying physique can absorb this Emperor's legacy. Speaking of which, this Emperor's legacy was meant for King. Now, the timing is perfect. The Heavenly Supremes in the hall couldn't help but murmur in envy, their gazes toward Chen filled with jealousy. This guy had gathered all the best opportunities in the great thousand worlds today. Truly, fortune favors the bold. The Heavenly Supremes sighed inwardly. If it were any other time, even just dealing with the two primitive law bodies would not have been an easy feat. Moreover, adding in the Emperor's legacy would have been unimaginable. But they couldn't help but admire him, for only Chen had the courage to shoulder the responsibility that could determine the fate of the entire great thousand worlds. Even the late-stage Saint grades like Chen Tian had not dared to accept such a heavy burden before. To wear the crown, one must bear its weight. While enjoying these unparalleled opportunities, one must also bear the responsibilities they bring. When the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor saw that both conditions had been met, they breathed a sigh of relief. They then turned to Chen, their expression solemn. Your conditions have been met. From here on, it depends on you, they said. Chen's eyes sharpened, like a sword drawn from its sheath. He nodded slightly and said, I will give it my all. Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor nodded, then stood up. A powerful pressure radiated from them, their expressions growing icy. However, during this time, we won't be idle, they declared. Starting now, we will reveal the heavenly evil god's apocalyptic plan and unite all the forces in the great thousand worlds to wage war on the extraterritorial evil clan. Since the heavenly evil god wants 5 years to recover, we will not allow him a moment of peace. Martial Ancestor and I will constantly track his position, forcing him into a battle with us to delay his recovery. The Heavenly Supremes in the hall stood up one after another, their faces filled with determination and a thirst for battle. Since the extraterritorial evil clan sought to destroy the great thousand worlds, they had no choice but to fight to the death. The atmosphere in the palace of the great thousand turned tense. Chen, too, was affected by this atmosphere. He stood up, his expression cold and stern. When Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor's eyes turned to him, they smiled and said, however, in the coming war, you need not participate. During these 5 years, you will stay at the northern wilderness hill to absorb the Emperor's legacy, refine the other two primitive law bodies, reach the Saint grade, and ultimately become the one ranked on the heavenly scroll. Only then, when things reach their worst, will our great thousand worlds have a fighting chance. Although Chen felt some regret for not being able to participate in this great counteroffensive, he also understood that his role here was the most crucial. He nodded in agreement. The Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor turned his gaze towards the other Heavenly Supremes, and his deep voice echoed. Everyone, return to your clans for now. In 2 months, gather all your forces and converge at the border of the Great Thousand Worlds for the counterattack against the demon domain. Yes. In the hall, all the heavenly supremes responded in unison, their voices shaking the palace. In the next moment, beams of light shot up to the sky, bursting through the northern wilderness hill and disappearing into the horizon. The Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor gazed at the departing figures of the heavenly supremes, their expressions cold and stern. Because they understood that the news from here would inevitably send shockwaves throughout the entire Great Thousand Worlds. The peace of the Great Thousand Worlds would no longer exist. The war outside the northern wilderness hill quickly spread like a storm across every corner of the Great Thousand Worlds in just a few short days. As a result, the entire Great Thousand Worlds trembled in shock. The ancient world war seemed distant to the beings of the present era, so most of them viewed the extraterritorial evil clans as strange and terrifying invaders. However, once that sense of unfamiliarity was torn away, the horrors of the evil clans, recorded in countless historical records, became clearer and more tangible to all beings in the Great Thousand Worlds. It was a terrifying power capable of overturning the entire Great Thousand Worlds, enslaving all of its countless beings. The battle at the northern wilderness hill was enough to make everyone realize the might of the extraterritorial evil clans. Even the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor could only force back the legendary Heavenly Evil God. And in 5 years, the Heavenly Evil God would become unimaginable in strength, likely marking the day of extinction for the Great Thousand Worlds. Just the thought of that day made every being in the Great Thousand Worlds tremble with fear. The entire Great Thousand Worlds was thrown into turmoil, shaken by panic and dread. However, this turmoil did not last long before being suppressed. The Great Thousand Worlds' top-tier superpowers, represented by the Boundless Fire Domain and Martial Realm, once again came together to form the Great Thousand Alliance. The Great Thousand Alliance called upon all experts at the Earth Supreme level and above to gather at the border between the Great Thousand Worlds and the Demon Domain. They would launch a preemptive strike to protect the Great Thousand Worlds. Countless strong cultivators began to surge toward the border, and the fear of the world's destruction 5 years from now began to ignite courage in the hearts of the beings in the Great Thousand Worlds. Rather than doing nothing and waiting for death, they decided it was better to take the initiative. Perhaps they could win a sliver of hope for the Great Thousand Worlds. If they were going to die anyway, it would be better to die with purpose. With this mindset, in less than a month, countless cultivators from the Great Thousand Worlds gathered at the border between the Great Thousand Worlds and the Demon Domain. They formed a massive army, their presence overwhelming, their spiritual energy causing violent waves for miles. Under the rallying of the army, the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor appeared. Their presence gave countless cultivators immeasurable confidence. At that moment, they were undoubtedly the leaders of the Great Thousand Worlds. The Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor looked towards the Demon Domain, where the demonic aura surged. In its dark depths, it seemed as though demons lurked. But their expressions remained calm. With a simple wave of their hands, their steady voices echoed through the heavens and earth. Attack! As countless cultivators from the Great Thousand Worlds surged into the Demon Domain, Chen, under the guidance of the Undying Lord, descended into the deepest part of the northern wilderness hill. Deep beneath the earth, resembling an abyss, he saw enormous chains, worn and ancient, covered in strange runes. However, these chains had all snapped, as if torn apart by some terrifying beast. This was where the Heavenly Evil God was sealed, the Undying Lord said, gazing at the broken chains. His aged face twitched involuntarily, his voice filled with unwillingness. After all, they, the Tomb Guardians, had painstakingly sealed the Heavenly Evil God for 49,000 years, only to watch him escape at the final moment. Chen had no words to offer. If anyone was to be blamed, it could only be the Heavenly Evil God, whose schemes were too deep. Before he was sealed, he had likely foreseen everything and began preparing his escape long in advance. The Undying Lord was well aware that saying these words had no effect. He gave a bitter smile and then took a step forward, walking into the abyss, eventually arriving at its end. Here, a high platform appeared, with stone steps extending down to their feet. The Undying Lord gazed solemnly at the steps, then, with a pilgrim's posture, respectfully ascended, step by step. Chen followed closely behind. There were a total of 9,990 stone steps. When his foot landed on the final step, an altar appeared before Chen's eyes, and his gaze quickly fixed on the center of the altar. At the center, there was a stone platform with a glowing spirit cushion on top. On the cushion sat a figure in a white robe, meditating quietly. The figure had a tall, slender frame, slightly gaunt, with long hair flowing down. His features were filled with charm, but his eyes were tightly shut, which was a pity. Those eyes must have been as brilliant as the starry sky. An indescribable aura of pressure, subtle yet ever-present, radiated from him, similar to the oppressive feeling that emanated from the Flame Emperor and the Martial Ancestor. This was the first-ranked figure in the Great Thousand Worlds, the Immortal Emperor. The Undying Lord knelt before the Immortal Emperor with reverence, bowing his head in respect, as if worshipping an ancestor. Mu Chen gazed at the Immortal Emperor's physical body, his face solemn. He then bent respectfully before him. Regardless of the Immortal Emperor's strength, or the great sacrifice he made to seal the heavenly evil god for the survival of the Great Thousand Worlds, Mu Chen had nothing but deep respect for him. Indeed, the immortal physique remains intact even after tens of thousands of years, Mu Chen muttered, his eyes fixed on the Immortal Emperor's body. He marveled, sensing that even a late Saint-grade expert's full-powered attack would likely leave no trace on this body. More importantly, he could feel the immense spiritual power sealed within this body, a power filled with the essence of immortality. Otherwise, it would never have survived for tens of thousands of years. Mu King, it's time to begin, the Undying Lord said, standing up. He gazed at the Immortal Emperor's body, his voice soft. Mu Chen nodded, his form shifting as he landed before the Immortal Emperor's body, sitting cross-legged in front of it. He raised his palms, and a pull of energy emanated, causing the Immortal Emperor's hands to slowly rise as well. "Senior, I apologize for the intrusion," Mu Chen said, taking a deep breath. His expression grew solemn because absorbing the spiritual energy within the Immortal Emperor's body was no simple task. The energy was too powerful. For someone at the immortal grade like him, or even a Saint-grade expert, it would be dangerous to attempt absorbing such vast energy. A single mistake could result in the destruction of his body. But there was no turning back now. If he wanted to become a ranked figure in 5 years, he had to seize this opportunity. To gain, one had to sacrifice. If he was afraid to even try, then he might as well not waste this chance. With his thoughts racing, Mu Chen no longer hesitated. He extended his palms, gently pressing them against the Immortal Emperor's hands. Boom. The moment of contact, Mu Chen's pupils constricted as he felt an immense, indescribable spiritual force rush into his body like an unstoppable tidal wave. It surged with unmatched power, flooding into him. Sizzle. In that instant, Mu Chen's arms were torn open, blood pouring out. His flesh trembled violently as it began to absorb the incoming spiritual energy. This energy, having been sealed for tens of thousands of years, had lost its original intent and become pure. But it still retained the essence of immortality. If a typical heavenly supreme were to absorb it, they would likely be unable to manage the overwhelming force and would be consumed by it, leading to a backlash of energy. Fortunately, Mu Chen had perfected the eternal undying body, so his energy was aligned with the Immortal Emperor's, allowing him to absorb the immense spiritual force directly. Boom, boom. The sound of thunder echoed from within Mu Chen's body. In just a few short seconds, he was drenched in blood, his body looking almost pitiful. The overwhelming spiritual energy was ruthlessly tearing apart his flesh. Fortunately, with his Saint-grade physique, his recovery ability was immense. At this moment, his self-healing activated, rapidly repairing his shattered body. The excruciating pain surged like a tidal wave, yet it was unable to shake Mu Chen's unyielding resolve. He gritted his teeth, focusing his mind, refusing to let himself be lost within the overwhelming pressure of spiritual energy. On the altar, the Undying Lord's body was pushed back, struck repeatedly by the ever-emerging waves of spiritual energy, until he was forced to retreat outside the altar's range. His face grim, he gazed at the altar. In the center, a massive spiritual energy storm had begun to form, with Mu Chen and the Immortal Emperor's bodies at its heart. The sheer power of the exploding spiritual energy was enough to leave even someone at the late Saint grade like him secretly shaken. He narrowed his eyes, watching Mu Chen's trembling form. One could imagine the excruciating pain he must be enduring under the immense assault of spiritual energy. However, even amidst the pain, The Undying Lord could feel the spiritual energy fluctuations emanating from Mu Chen's body, slowly but steadily growing stronger. As long as Mu Chen could persist, stepping into the Saint grade was not an impossible feat. Mu King, you must succeed. In 5 years, the survival of the Great Thousand Worlds will rest in your hands. Demon Domain. The sky here appeared dim, with a cold, sinister aura hanging in the air. The land was cracked and decayed, bearing the scars of long decay. On a mountaintop, the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor stood with their hands clasped behind their backs. Both were frowning as they surveyed the vast expanse. In the distance, countless streaks of spiritual light flickered. These were the powerful forces of the Great Thousand Worlds, searching for traces of the extraterritorial evil clan. Half a year had passed since the Great Thousand Worlds launched their counterattack. Yet, despite the passing time, no grand battle had erupted as expected. When the forces of the Great Thousand Worlds surged forward like a tidal wave, the shadows of the demons were few and far between. It felt as though the entire demon domain was eerily empty. During the sweep, some remnants of the extraterritorial evil clan had been found, but as soon as the two sides made contact, they were submerged by the overwhelming flood of the Great Thousand Worlds forces, wiped out without a sound. Flame Emperor, Martial Ancestor. The information we gathered from some remnants of the extraterritorial evil clan suggests that they have nearly all retreated into various lower dimensions. Qin Tian's figure appeared behind them, speaking in a deep voice. Just as I thought, they've gone into hiding. The Flame Emperor sighed softly. With the heavenly evil god needing time to recover and unable to take action, their side had the upper hand for now. With no such concerns, the Great Thousand Worlds Alliance was currently in the dominant position. As a result, the extraterritorial evil clan had chosen to avoid confrontation and bide their time. If they've hidden, we'll just have to root them out, inch by inch. Martial Ancestor's voice was steady, yet cold. The extraterritorial evil clan was powerful, and even if they had fled into lower dimensions, it was inevitable that some strange fluctuations would escape. With careful probing, they could be found, bit by bit. No matter what, they couldn't allow the extraterritorial evil clan to rest easy, nor let the heavenly evil god have even a moment's peace. Agreed. Qin Tian nodded firmly, his eyes flashing with a murderous glint, then turned and left. The forces of the Great Thousand Worlds had originally come to the demon domain with the courage to risk their lives, expecting a battle for survival. However, no one had anticipated this situation, which left everyone with a frustrating sense of having punched into thin air. As Qin Tian left, the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor exchanged a glance. They both saw the weight of concern in each other's eyes. They knew that if the heavenly evil god insisted on hiding, it would be nearly impossible to track him down amidst the countless lower dimensions. Time was passing quickly. With each day of delay, the heavenly evil god would grow stronger, until he eventually regained his terrifying nine-eye state. I wonder how Mu Chen is doing now. Their gazes turned towards the distant direction of the Great Thousand Worlds, their expression serious. Hopefully, he succeeds. If not, 5 years from now, the Great Thousand Worlds may not have a single chance left. The massive spiritual energy storm ravaged the depths of the earth, and as the storm expanded, the ground of northern Wilderness Hill began to tear apart. At the very center of the spiritual energy tempest, two figures sat cross-legged, facing each other. Their bodies were as still as boulders, unmoving. Their palms met, and from within the Undying Emperor's physique, boundless spiritual energy surged forth, roaring as it rushed into Mu Chen's body, violently tearing apart the flesh that had been healing. Blood seeped out continuously, yet Mu Chen's face remained unwavering, for after more than half a year of such torment, he had grown accustomed to the agony of his flesh being torn inch by inch. Once accustomed, numbness naturally followed. At a distance from the altar, the Undying Lord sat upon a stone pillar, his aged face gazing at Mu Chen's figure. He muttered, as he reached the late immortal grade. He could sense the spiritual energy fluctuations emanating from Mu Chen's body, which had now entered the late stage of immortal grade. Such speed, it's a bit slow. The Undying Lord murmured to himself. From a normal cultivation perspective, progressing from mid to late immortal grade in just half a year would be considered incredibly fast. But right now, Mu Chen was absorbing the immense legacy left behind by the Undying Emperor, a growth rate that couldn't be measured by ordinary standards. Furthermore, the Undying Lord could sense that, after breaking through to late immortal grade, Mu Chen's spiritual energy growth had begun to slow. This wasn't due to a lack of spiritual energy, but because Mu Chen was actively suppressing the absorption speed. Such potential, no wonder he's reached this point at such a young age and gained the recognition of the eternal undying body. The undying Lord mused, understanding Mu Chen's intentions, and couldn't help but secretly praise him. Mu Chen was deliberately suppressing the growth of his spiritual energy because an overly rapid increase would lead to an unstable foundation. Even though the spiritual energy within the undying emperor's body had lost its will and could be absorbed effortlessly, its sheer magnitude, if poured into Mu Chen without restraint, would inevitably affect his foundation. Thus, Mu Chen was doing everything he could to suppress the absorption speed, giving himself more time to adapt to the surging power. However, this meant that the pain he had to endure would continue to lengthen. In the face of the powerful forces that could be obtained so quickly, Mu Chen always maintained a calm mindset, choosing the method most beneficial to himself. This resolve was something even the Undying Lord deeply admired. No wonder both the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor held such high regard for him. However, despite Mu Chen's rising spiritual power, he had still not achieved the so-called 3 divine realms of 1 Qi transforms 3 purities. This worried the Undying Lord, as this was the true foundation that Mu Chen needed to challenge the Heavenly Scroll. Without reaching that stage, even with Mu Chen's talent, it would take 100 years of accumulation to reach that level. But right now, they clearly didn't have that much time. Therefore, only when Mu Chen truly achieved the 3 divine realms would he be qualified for such an opportunity. Otherwise, all these chances would be in vain, even if Mu Chen reached the Saint grade. Time passed, and a year and a half flew by. Since the battle at Northern Wilderness Hill, 2 years had already passed. Boom, boom. In a lower dimension, destructive shocks raged relentlessly, causing the entire plane to collapse. Countless spiritual shadows filled the sky, clashing with demonic shadows, creating earth-shattering battles. The Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor stood high in the sky, stabilizing the lower dimension. After all, with so many powerhouses beyond the limits of the lower dimension flooding in, a small mistake could cause the entire plane to collapse. This lower dimension was occupied by the Blade Demon Clan, one of the 32 major clans of the extraterritorial evil clan. They had originally concealed themselves here, but were accidentally detected by the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor. Immediately, the forces of the Great Thousand Worlds Alliance surged in like a tidal wave. Boom. In the distance, a sharp blade light capable of splitting the heavens shot up into the sky. This blade light carried a lethal intent, and even a late-stage Saint-grade expert would not dare to underestimate it. Buzz. The blade light shot into the sky. At the same time, a sword light cut through the void, tens of thousands of feet long, clashing with the blade light. Sizzle. A sharp, ear-piercing sound rang out as the space around them began to collapse. A flash of green light streaked by, appearing behind one of the demonic shadows. The demonic figure's body stiffened in an instant. The azure light gathered, and the figure of the azure-robed sword saint slowly materialized. In his hand, the azure-edged sword was gently sheathed. SSSHH. Behind him, the massive demonic figure began to shatter. It was none other than the leader of the Blade Demon Clan, the Slaughter Heavenly Demon Emperor. However, at this moment, he glared at the army of the Great Thousand Worlds Alliance with a twisted, malevolent expression and hissed with venomous fury, "When my god returns, that will be the day the Great Thousand Worlds meet their annihilation." Boom. As his shriek fell, his body suddenly exploded. The overwhelming demonic aura surged, wreaking havoc and ravaging the strong warriors of the Great Thousand Worlds. Roar. At that moment, flames rained down from the heavens, completely incinerating the monstrous, destructive demonic aura. The one who acted was, of course, the Flame Emperor. His eyes remained indifferent as he gazed at the fleeing Blade Demon Clan. He knew that from now on, one of the 32 clans of the extraterritorial evil clan would no longer have a seat. In the year and a half since, they had already eradicated 6 major clans. Yet, they still hadn't found any trace of the heavenly evil god. The Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor gazed into the void, their eyes deep and piercing. "Heavenly evil god, where are you hiding? Even with all this, can we not force you out?" In a dark, oppressive space where the light was faint, a demon hall hovered, suspended between the dim heavens and earth. Inside the hall, the sacred Heavenly Demon Emperor suddenly opened his eyes, his face shadowed with malice as he looked toward the center of the hall. There, a shattered demon monument lay in pieces. It was the life tablet of the Slaughter Heavenly Demon Emperor. The destruction of the life tablet meant that the Slaughter Heavenly Demon Emperor had been eradicated. This Flame Emperor, martial ancestor, truly a ruthless. The sacred heavenly demon emperor muttered coldly, but there was no sorrow in his eyes. For him, retreating now was merely a tactic to prepare for a fiercer counterattack later. He raised his head and looked toward the deepest part of the dark world, where an endless demonic aura churned, as if something terrifying was being brewed. A sinister smile curled on his lips, and a bloodthirsty gleam flickered in his eyes. Flame Emperor, martial ancestor, don't rush. Soon, very soon, when the time comes, we will slaughter everyone dear to you, one by one, right in front of you. Boom. A terrifying surge of spiritual pressure suddenly erupted, sweeping across the entire northern wilderness hill. The Undying Lord, sitting cross-legged on a stone pillar, abruptly opened his eyes. His gaze locked onto the altar, where the spiritual fluctuations erupting from Mu Chen's body had finally reached the level of saint grade. On the altar, Mu Chen's eyes, which had been closed for 2 years, slowly opened at that moment. As he felt the vast, surging power within him, a brilliant light shot from his eyes. Now, at this very moment, he took a deep breath, his eyes filled with fervor. This was the perfect moment to break through to the 3 divine realms. Boom. Boom. The violent spiritual energy roared like a thunder dragon, shaking the entire northern wilderness hill with its immense power. At the eye of the spiritual energy storm, Mu Chen's robe billowed as the air around him crackled with energy. His pores opened, releasing spiritual light as waves of powerful spiritual pressure radiated from his body. This was the might of Saint Grade. As Mu Chen felt the overwhelming spiritual energy surging within him, a trace of uncontainable excitement flashed across his face. But soon, his expression calmed as he knew that breaking through to Saint Grade was only the first step. His ultimate goal was to reach the 3 divine realms. He took a deep breath and swiftly formed a seal with his hands. One chi transforms 3 purities. 2 beams of light shot out from his body and landed beside him, forming a triangle around the Undying Emperor's body. Each one extended a hand and pressed it against the Undying Emperor's flesh. A mighty, absorbing force erupted from the 3 figures. Boom. It sounded like thunder, as torrents of spiritual energy began to flow into the 2 incarnations, making their bodies tremble as they absorbed the incoming energy. The 3 figures absorbed the energy simultaneously, and their efficiency was much faster than before. Mu Chen's expression remained calm as he felt the energy within the 2 incarnations rapidly increase. The stronger the incarnations became, the harder it would be to control them. However, Mu Chen did not stop. Instead, he accelerated the absorption process. He glanced at the black and white Mu Chen, then slowly closed his eyes, waiting quietly for the arrival of some extreme limit. And he waited for a full 6 months. Half a year later, on a certain day, Mu Chen opened his half-closed eyes and looked at the 2 clones. At this moment, terrifying spiritual light coiled around the clones, and with each flicker of their eyes, an overwhelming pressure of spiritual power radiated. Under Mu Chen's deliberate control, the spiritual energy within the 2 clones subtly exceeded that of his own main body by a hair's breadth. In this state, Mu Chen could also feel that his previously absolute control over the 2 clones seemed to have become significantly more obscure. However, his expression remained calm, as if he had not noticed anything unusual. Still not quite right. Mu Chen muttered softly to himself. Then, he made a single hand seal, and his eternal undying body emerged behind him. It transformed into a brilliant glaze of light, pouring into his body in an unstoppable surge. Unity of man and law. Mu Chen had now stepped into the Saint Grade. When he once again activated the fusion of his physical body with the supreme Dharmakaya, he did so with greater composure than several years ago. The dazzling glaze of light radiated from his body, and at the same time, the 2 clones' eyes shimmered with the same glaze. Their spiritual energy surged once more. Boom. Boom. Their bodies trembled as spiritual light gathered in their eyes. A strange change seemed to be unfolding. Sensing this transformation, a sharp gleam suddenly shot out of Mu Chen's eyes. At this moment, the connection between his main body and the 2 clones seemed to have become incredibly obscure. In the distance, the Undying Lord watched this scene, his expression shifting slightly. He murmured, "What is he doing? Is he not worried his clones will break free from his control?" Mu Chen's eyes were as deep as an abyss. He gazed at the 2 clones and could faintly sense that, despite the obscured connection, there was still some link between them. After all, these 2 clones were not crafted from external materials but had been separated from his own body. One chi transforms 3 purities. The first 2 realms created clones, but there was always a distinction between the original and the clones. Once the original perishes, the clones will naturally dissipate. But this is not the ultimate realm of one chi transforms three purities. Mu Chen's eyes revealed a look of enlightenment as he muttered to himself, to reach the so-called three divine realms, one must eliminate the distinction between the original and the clone. You are in me, and I am in you. In this way, the clone becomes the original, and the original becomes the clone. Mu Chen looked at the two clones, a faint smile curling on his lips. He stood up, raising his hand gently. His palm seemed to radiate some mysterious light. From now on, we are one. To destroy me, you must slay all three bodies at once. The implication of his words was clear. In the future, to kill Mu Chen, simply slaying his main body would be useless. Unless one could destroy his main body and both clones simultaneously, it would have no effect. As the words fell, Mu Chen gently swiped his hand. In an instant, the black-robed Mu Chen's body trembled, and boundless spiritual wisdom flickered in his eyes. The familiar smile that appeared was identical to that of Mu Chen's main body. He smiled and cupped his fist at Mu Chen. Mu Chen smiled back and raised his hand again, tracing a mysterious trajectory before it fell once more. The white-robed Mu Chen's eyes gleamed, and he smiled as he touched his face. This is the three divine realms. Mu Chen also smiled lightly. In that moment, he could feel that the control he had once had over the two clones had vanished. But this did not mean he could not control them. Rather, because the three of them were now intertwined, there was no need for such control anymore. Mu Chen raised his hand as if to strike down, but just then, his expression shifted slightly. A strange wave of emotion surged within him, pulling him into a state of deep realization. He stood still for half a day, while the black and white Mu Chen beside him also wore a contemplative expression. After a long while, Mu Chen slowly looked up and exchanged a brief nod with his black and white clones. Then, Mu Chen's hand, glowing with mysterious light, fell once more, as though slicing through the void twice. As his hand descended, Mu Chen's body shook violently. In the next moment, two golden beams shot up from his head and soared into the sky, eventually disappearing beyond the northern wilderness hill, vanishing into the vast expanse. Mu Chen gazed deeply at the two disappearing golden lights. After a long pause, he slowly retracted his gaze. Whoosh! The figure of the Undying Lord tore through the air and landed on the altar. His eyes were filled with surprise as he gazed at the three Mu Chens, and even his aging face couldn't hide the amazement that appeared. Because even he could not tell which of the three Mu Chens was the true one. Or rather, at this moment, all three of them were the true Mu Chen. Congratulations, Mu King, you've successfully cultivated the three divine realms. The Undying Lord exclaimed sincerely, his voice carrying a note of respect. At this moment, Mu Chen, though only at the early saint grade, gave off a faint sense of pressure, which made the Undying Lord realize that if a fight were to break out, even he might not be able to match the current Mu Chen. In some ways, Mu Chen now ranked just below the Flame Emperor and Martial Ancestor in terms of combat power within the Great Thousand Worlds. As his words fell, the Undying Lord suddenly waved his hand, and two beams of light shot down from the sky, hovering before them. Mu Chen, sensing something, looked up. In the air before him, two stone lotuses slowly floated, and within the lotuses, two figures of light emerged, exuding an incredibly ancient aura. One figure radiated holy light, enveloped by a divine glow, creating an overwhelming sense of impenetrable defense, as if the world could collapse but it would remain unscathed. The other figure emitted endless waves of spiritual power. Its spiritual energy was so immense and boundless that even Mu Chen was moved by its force. Are these the Endless Radiance Body, known as the first in defense across the Great Thousand Worlds, and the Tai Ling Sacred Body, which holds the greatest spiritual power in the entire realm? Mu Chen gazed at the two figures, which radiated ancient, primal fluctuations. His expression couldn't help but stir, and a fierce heat sparkled in his eyes. The Undying Lord also gazed at the two ancient primordial Dharmakayas with admiration. There were only 5 such Dharmakayas left in the entire Great Thousand Worlds, and now, 3 of them had appeared here. If word of this got out, it would undoubtedly cause an enormous stir. It seemed that only because the Great Thousand Worlds was on the brink of life and death could anyone dare to gather all 3 of the primordial Dharmakayas into one. Thinking about it, if Mu Chen could succeed in cultivating all 3 primordial Dharmakayas, even the Undying Lord would be secretly shaken. With the Endless Radiance Body's unmatched defense, the Tai Ling Ancient Body's boundless spiritual energy, and the Eternal Undying Body's immortality, Mu Chen could very well become the third-ranked individual on the Heavenly Scroll. Mu King, The endless radiance body and Tai Ling's sacred body are now entrusted to you. From here on, it all depends on you, the Undying Lord said in a deep voice. The younger generation will certainly give it their all. Mu Chen's expression grew solemn. To have a chance to become the third-ranked individual, the Great Thousand Worlds had given him an unparalleled opportunity. Having reaped the benefits of this chance, he knew he must shoulder the responsibility that came with it. He turned his gaze to the two black and white Mu Chens, who now nodded gravely at him. Whoosh! In the next moment, their bodies shot up into the sky, landing on the lotus platforms. Step by step, they ascended, until they finally touched the two ancient figures of light.